and suddenly, boom, I got a face full of gas. And then the pilot light jumped and my face caught on fire.
Jay Leno cracked jokes for 22 years on late-night television. He was the man with the chin, the suits, the easy laugh. But beneath the suits and laughs were incidents that nearly cost him everything, and it all began with that thing that was under his classic car lift. Come, let us tell you his unbelievable story, the garage that became a death trap. November 12, 2022, a Saturday morning in Burbank, California, Jay Leno bit more than he could chew. If he knew what was going to happen, maybe he wouldn't have gone to his big dog garage, a massive 122,000 square foot facility that houses over 180 cars and 160 motorcycles. To the outside world, the garage looks like any other warehouse. Inside, it's a temple, a shrine to automotive history. On this particular morning, Jay was working on one of his favorites, a 1907 white steam car. That car was special. It wasn't a typical vintage automobile, but a vehicle from an era when cars ran on steam power using gasoline-fueled pilot lights to heat water into pressurized vapor. Very few people on Earth understand how these machines work, and Jay is one of them. He slid underneath the car to fix a problem. The car's fuel line was clogged, a common problem with vehicles this old. Residue builds up, dirt settles in, and the line stops feeding fuel to the burner. He'd done this repair countless times before. Simple job, or so he thought. He tried to clear the blockage by blowing air through the line. Standard procedure, but instead of the blockage loosening gradually, the entire line suddenly gave way. Gasoline exploded directly into his face, and suddenly his face was drenched in fuel. He could barely see, and a few feet away, there's an open flame. Jay shut his eyes instinctively. He held his breath. A decision that would later save his life. He knew that breathing in those fumes while they ignited would scorch his lungs from the inside out. The gasoline wasn't just liquid anymore. It had atomized, turned into a fine mist hanging in the air around him. The most dangerous kind of fuel, the kind that ignites with explosive force. A spark leapt from the pilot light and the fire consumed his face. 10 seconds. That's how long Jay estimated he was on fire. 10 seconds doesn't sound like much, but when your skin is burning, when flames are eating away at your flesh, every second stretches into an eternity. He couldn't see. He couldn't move fast enough to escape. He was trapped under a car, his face melting, his hands burning as he tried to shield himself. Then Dave Kalaki, Jay's longtime friend and fellow mechanic, saw the flames. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself onto Jay and smothered the fire with his bare hands and arms. He dragged Jay out from under the car. The fire was out, but the damage was done. Jay's face, neck, chest, and hands were covered in second- and third-degree burns. The kind of burns that destroy not just the top layer of skin, but the tissue underneath. The kind that requires weeks of excruciating treatment. He was rushed to the Grossman Burn Center in West Hills, one of the top burn treatment facilities in the country. When doctors examined him, they realized how serious his injuries were. Third-degree burns covered significant portions of his upper body. His left ear was so badly damaged it had essentially melted. He spent 9 days in the burn unit. 9 days of skin grafts, where doctors take healthy skin from one part of your body and use it to cover the burned areas. But here's what makes Jay Leno different from most people. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, still healing, still wearing bandages, he walked onto a comedy stage in Los Angeles and did a full set. The audience couldn't believe it, neither could the entertainment press. Everyone expected him to take months off to recover quietly at home. But for Jay, home was full of pain. You'll see what we mean later on. Instead, he made jokes about his new face. He told the crowd he was fine, downplayed the whole thing, even though anyone could see the burns were still healing. And then he went back to his garage. You'd think nearly burning to death would make someone reconsider their hobby. You'd think it would be a wake-up call, a sign from the universe to slow down. But Jay didn't intend to slow down. Maybe if he had known what was coming next, he would have slowed down. Would he have? By January 2023, barely 2 months after the fire, he was testing a vintage 1940s motorcycle. One of those beautiful, dangerous machines from an era before helmets were mandatory, before safety regulations existed. He was riding through a parking lot in Los Angeles when he smelled something familiar. Gasoline, a leak somewhere in the bike's fuel system. This was a blast from the past. Jay didn't know that that blast had something more for him. Jay slowed down, trying to figure out where the leak was coming from. His attention was focused on the smell, on diagnosing the problem. So, he didn't see the wire. Apparently, someone had strung a wire across the parking lot, nearly invisible, right at chest height. Jay rode directly into it. The impact was brutal. The motorcycle stopped instantly. Jay didn't. He was thrown to the ground with enough force to break his collarbone, crack 2 ribs, and shatter both kneecaps. When paramedics arrived, they found him conscious but in severe pain. He had multiple fractures and significant trauma. He had another trip to the hospital, did more scans, and had doctors shaking their heads in disbelief. 2 life-threatening accidents in 60 days, both involving vintage vehicles and both nearly fatal. The press went crazy. People started asking questions. Is Jay Leno okay? Is he being careless? Does he have some kind of death wish? Maybe he had, but Jay's response was simple. I'm fine. I'll keep working. This is what I do. And that's when people started to realize something. This isn't just about cars for Jay Leno. It's deeper than that. It's about identity, about purpose, about refusing to let age or injury or fear stop him from doing what he loves. But where did this obsession come from? What turned a working-class kid from Massachusetts into a man willing to risk everything for old machines? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. The kid who couldn't sit still. James Douglas Muir. Leno was born on April 28, 1950 in New Rochelle, New York. His mother, Catherine, was a homemaker. His father, Angelo, was an insurance salesman. They weren't rich, not even close. They were solidly middle class, the kind of family where you wore hand-me-downs and ate dinner at the same time every night. When Jay was young, the family moved to Andover, Massachusetts, a small town about 25 miles north of Boston. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. Jay was not a good student. He struggled with dyslexia, though it wasn't diagnosed until much later. Reading was hard. Writing was harder. School felt like torture, but he was funny. Even as a kid, he could make people laugh. He'd crack jokes in class, imitate teachers, find humor in everyday situations. It was his survival mechanism, his way of fitting in when academics failed him. His parents were supportive but practical. They wanted him to get a stable job, something reliable, insurance sales maybe, or working for the city, something with a pension and benefits. Jay had other plans, and in those plans, cars were included. When Jay was about 14 years old, he got his first job. He worked at a McDonald's, making $1.25 an hour. He saved every penny. Not for clothes or records or the things most teenagers wanted, he saved for a car. His first vehicle was a 1934 Ford pickup truck. He paid $350 for it. It barely ran. The engine knocked, the brakes were questionable, and it leaked oil like a sieve. But to Jay, it was perfect. He taught himself how to fix it. He read manuals, asked questions at auto shops, and learned by trial and error. When something broke, he figured out how to repair it. When a part needed replacing, he'd hunt through junkyards until he found one. This wasn't just about transportation. It was about mastery, about understanding how things worked. Every car is a puzzle, a mechanical problem waiting to be solved. And Jay loved puzzles. He started buying more vehicles, old motorcycles, broken-down cars, anything he could afford. His parents thought he was crazy. Why buy something that doesn't work? But Jay understood something they didn't. These machines had history. They were pieces of engineering from different eras, different philosophies of design. Fixing them wasn't just a hobby. It was like bringing the past back to life. And that feeling, that rush of making a dead engine roar back to life, became his addiction. After high school, Jay enrolled at Emerson College in Boston. He studied speech therapy, mostly because he didn't know what else to do. But he spent most of his time performing at comedy clubs, doing open mics, and bombing more often than he succeeded. Comedy in the 1970s was brutal. The audience was tough. Hecklers were ruthless. You either developed thick skin or you quit. Jay developed thick skin. He moved to Los Angeles in 1973, driving cross-country in one of his old cars. He lived in a tiny apartment, worked odd jobs, and performed at every club that would have him. The Comedy Store, the Improv, dive bars in the Valley. Slowly, gradually, he started getting noticed. He had a clean, observational style. No shock value, no profanity, just smart observations about everyday life. Bookers liked him because he could perform anywhere for any crowd. In 1977, he made his first appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. It was the holy grail for comedians, the moment that could launch a career. Jay killed it, and Carson invited him back, again and again. Over the next 15 years, Jay became one of Carson's most frequent guest hosts. When Carson retired in 1992, Jay was chosen to replace him. For the next 22 years, he hosted The Tonight Show, becoming one of the most recognizable faces in America. He interviewed presidents, movie stars, musicians. He became wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined as a kid in Andover. But here's the thing, most people don't know. Jay never spent his Tonight Show money, not a dollar. He lived entirely off his stand-up income. Every penny from NBC went straight into savings and investments, and a significant chunk went into cars. By the mid-1990s, Jay's car collection was becoming legendary. He didn't just buy expensive modern supercars, he sought out automotive history, steam cars from 1906, pre-war motorcycles, rare prototypes, vehicles that museums couldn't acquire. His collection grew to over 180 cars and 160 motorcycles. He bought a massive warehouse in Burbank and converted it into Big Dog Garage, a 122,000 square foot facility with lifts, a machine shop, a fabrication area, and a paint booth. This wasn't just storage. It was a working garage where he and his team restored vehicles, built parts from scratch, and documented automotive history. In 2006, he launched a web series called Jay Leno's Garage. It started small, just Jay talking about his cars with a cheap camera, but it grew into a massive success, eventually moving to CNBC as a full television show. People loved it because Jay wasn't pretentious. He didn't just show off expensive cars. He explained how they worked, why they mattered, what made them special. He got his hands dirty and did the work himself, and that's what made the accidents so shocking. But should they be? There are usual mishaps in a regular mechanic workshop full of experts from time to time. No one promised a smooth experience. But then, Jay's car obsession hasn't always been smooth. The lawsuit that almost derailed everything. In 2009, something happened that reminded everyone that vintage cars come with risks beyond physical danger. Legal danger. Jay had purchased a 1931 Cadillac from a seller in California. Beautiful car, rare model, exactly the kind of vehicle Jay loved. He paid a significant amount for it, took it back to his garage, and started restoration work. Then he got sued, and the accusation, completely unexpected. The lawsuit, filed by a previous owner, claimed that Jay had purchased the car knowing it had been stolen decades earlier. The plaintiff argued that the vehicle should be returned to its rightful owner. Jay fought the case. He argued he'd purchased the car in good faith, that he had no knowledge of any theft, that he'd done proper due diligence before buying it. The case dragged on for months. Legal fees piled up as the automotive world watched closely because the outcome would set precedent for how vintage car sales were handled. Eventually, the case was settled out of court. The exact terms weren't disclosed, but Jay was allowed to keep the vehicle. The lawsuit was a reminder that collecting rare cars isn't just about money and passion. It's about navigating complex ownership histories, verifying provenance, and accepting that some vehicles come with legal baggage. But Jay didn't let it slow him down. If anything, it made him more careful, more thorough in his acquisitions. After the 2022 fire and 2023 motorcycle crash, reporters asked Jay the obvious question, why keep doing this? Why risk your life for old machines? His answer was simple but profound. These cars, these motorcycles, they're not just metal and rubber, they're history, they're engineering, they're someone's dream made real. When you restore one of these machines, you're not just fixing a car, you're preserving a piece of human achievement. He went on, and yeah, it's dangerous. Working on old cars is dangerous. Riding old motorcycles is dangerous, but everything worth doing has risks. I'd rather die doing what I love than live a long, boring life doing nothing. It's a philosophy that makes some people uncomfortable. In an age of safety regulations and risk avoidance, Jay represents something different. He represents the idea that passion matters more than safety, that purpose matters more than longevity. But it's also a philosophy that nearly killed him, twice. Let us get into the details of his accident for you to get the picture. The burns that changed everything. The details of the burn injuries are hard to hear. Third-degree burns destroy every layer of skin. They expose raw tissue underneath. The pain is described as worse than anything imaginable. Jay needed multiple skin grafts. Doctors had to take healthy skin from other parts of his body and transplant it onto his face, neck, and hands. The procedure is excruciating even with the best pain medication. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy helps burns heal faster by flooding your body with pure oxygen in a pressurized chamber. But it's not comfortable. You sit in what looks like a glass coffin for hours at a time, breathing through a mask, feeling the pressure build in your ears. Jay did this for 9 days straight. His left ear was so badly damaged that reconstructive surgery was required. Even now, if you look closely at recent photos, you can see the scarring, the slight discoloration where new skin was grafted. But he doesn't hide it. He doesn't talk about it constantly, but he doesn't pretend it didn't happen. It's part of his story now, part of who he is. Then let's talk about the bike accident. Breaking both kneecaps is particularly brutal. The kneecap, or patella, is a small bone that protects your knee joint. When it fractures, every movement becomes agony. Walking is nearly impossible. Standing hurts. Even sitting still, the pain radiates through your entire leg. Jay broke both of them, plus his collarbone, plus 2 ribs. The collarbone fracture means you can't lift your arm without intense pain. Broken ribs mean every breath hurts. Every cough feels like someone is stabbing you. He was 72 years old when this happened. Most people that age would never fully recover. They'd need months of physical therapy. Some would end up with permanent mobility issues. Jay was back on stage within weeks. So here's the question that haunts this story. Is Jay Leno brave or foolish? Is he living life to the fullest, or is he tempting fate? Some people see him as an inspiration. A man who refuses to let age, injury, or fear stop him from pursuing his passion. A reminder that life is short and you should spend it doing what you love. Others see him as reckless. A wealthy man who could afford to hire mechanics to do the dangerous work but chooses to risk his life instead. Someone whose luck will eventually run out. Maybe both perspectives are true. Maybe that's what makes his story so compelling. Today, Big Dog Garage continues to operate. Jay still works on cars himself, though friends say he's a bit more careful now. He still rides motorcycles, though he wears more protective gear. The 1907 white steam car that nearly killed him has been fully restored. It runs perfectly, and yes, Jay still drives it. The collection keeps growing. Rare finds, barn discoveries, vehicles that nobody else wants to deal with because they're too difficult to restore. Jay's team includes some of the best automotive experts in the world. They machine parts that no longer exist. They reverse engineer systems that haven't been manufactured in a century. They solve mechanical problems that would make most mechanics quit. And Jay is there for all of it, hands dirty, clothes covered in grease, asking questions, learning, teaching. So what actually almost killed Jay Leno under his own lift? The obvious answer is fire, gasoline, a spark at the wrong moment. But the real answer is more complicated. What almost killed Jay Leno was the same thing that gives his life meaning. His refusal to let anyone else touch his cars. His insistence on doing the dangerous work himself. His belief that the risk is worth it. He could hire people, he has the money, he could stand back and supervise, let younger mechanics crawl under the cars, let someone else test the vintage motorcycles. But that's not who he is. However, there is a dark reason he might be doing this. For Jay, the cars aren't just objects to collect. They're relationships. They're conversations with the past. They're challenges that demand his full attention and respect. And sometimes, they fight back. The toll. Will Jay Leno ever slow down? Will there be a third accident that finally makes him reconsider? Based on everything we know about him, probably not. He's 74 now, still performing stand-up, still hosting his garage show, still buying cars, still working underneath them, hands-on, refusing to play it safe. Maybe that's admirable, maybe it's crazy, maybe it's both. But one thing is certain, Jay Leno will never be the kind of collector who keeps his cars in climate-controlled garages, untouched and pristine. He'll never be the guy who just looks at his machines from a safe distance. He'll be under the lift, getting dirty, taking risks, living the way he's always lived. And if that eventually kills him, at least he'll die doing what he loves. Because for Jay Leno, that's the whole point. But can Jay really afford to die at this point? Because if he does, what would happen to Mavis? On the surface, Mavis and Jay weren't meant to be. She didn't want love, and she had already decided that marriage wasn't for her. She was a feminist, independent, and deeply certain that tying her future to a man's life wasn't part of her plan. But when she went to a comedy show and saw Jay on the stage, something stirred inside her. But it wasn't only her. Jay saw her too, and the show, they met each other, and from there, they began to talk. They couldn't stop talking, and within a few weeks, they were inseparable, and they began to date. For someone who didn't want a relationship, Mavis and Jay had a strong relationship. But what made their relationship strong wasn't the thrill of just dating. It was how similar they were beneath the surface. They were both practical, private, and grounded in reality. They loved stability over drama, and both were drawn to humor and intelligence. Mavis had feared marriage would limit her independence, but Jay never tried to shape her into anything. He respected her mind, admired her strength, and let her be exactly who she was. That became the foundation of everything that came after. In 1980, after years of dating, Jay proposed in the most Jay Leno way possible. Not with a ring, not on one knee, not with any of the theatrics he made fun of on stage. He told her they should marry so she would be protected under his insurance. It was practical, honest even, and it worked. They bought a house, settled into a life that was deeply ordinary behind the fame, and they made a decision. They chose not to have children. They didn't chase scandals or headlines. Well, except for that time, Jay Leno got into a controversy in his career. Their marriage was built on the quiet things, eating dinner together, inside jokes, shared routines, long conversations, and deep respect. For more than 40 years, they stayed locked together like two gears turning in the same machine. When Jay got rich, he didn't swap his wife for glamour. When he became a global entertainer, he still came home every night to her. When he built one of the largest private garages in the world, he still spent mornings making her oatmeal and evenings watching videos with her. The world knew Jay Leno the comedian, but the one person who understood Jay Leno the man was the woman waiting at home. And that's what makes the next part of their story so powerful and so heartbreaking. Mavis was diagnosed with dementia. When Mavis began showing signs of dementia, it wasn't sudden. Memory slips, confusion, anxiety, and time disappearing in unpredictable ways. Slowly, the woman who had once fiercely protected her independence now needed help with simple things. She needed reassurance, grounding, and he gave all of this to her and more. Then things got worse. In 2024, Jay Leno's quiet, private life took a public turn when he was granted conservatorship over his wife, Mavis Leno. A judge in Los Angeles approved it after determining she had been diagnosed with advanced dementia. This wasn't a moment of control or ego for Jay, it was a legal and emotional necessity. Mavis's own lawyer and her neurologist agreed he was the right person to manage her care and their assets. According to court filings, Mavis sometimes doesn't recognize him anymore. She doesn't always remember her own date of birth. The judge praised Jay's devotion, noting that he was fit to serve, and told him, "Everything you're doing is right." Jay hasn't shied away from talking about how hard this has been. In interviews, he's admitted that there are days when Mavis seems completely lost, especially when she gets memories of her parents. But Mavis doesn't remember the food time she has had with her partners. Her mind brutally reminds her of her mother's death. This moment is the hardest part for him. People assume physical illness is the cruelest. But for Jay, watching someone he's loved for over 40 years lose their memory piece by piece cuts deeper. Yet even in that darkness, he tries to find light. "I like taking care of her," he said in an interview. "It's not work. I enjoy her company. We have fun with it." He admits there are days when he has to feed her, guide her to the bathroom, help her do things she once did on her own, yet he frames it as a calling, not a burden. He's become her anchor, the provider, the protector, the man she's married to and despite everything still trusts. When Jay reflects on their marriage, which began in the 1970s comedy clubs and survived decades of fame, he often goes back to a vow. He told interviewer Graham Bensinger, "When you get married, you sort of take a vow. Will I live up to this? Or will I be like a sleazy guy if something happens to my wife? No, I didn't." That vow isn't just a concept for him anymore. It's not about loyalty or showmanship. It's about responsibility. It's about being the man who stays, not just because he promised he would, but because now she needs him more than ever. He now uses flashcards, simple pictures of people, places, moments to jog her memory. Sometimes she looks at a card, laughs, then says she doesn't recognize who she sees, but he knows she doesn't always remember. He knows she gets lost in time, but he refuses to treat her like a burden. He calls it love. And if anything should happen to Jay, what would become of his wife? On some level, Jay is terrified of not being there. After all, he's the one who agreed to take care of her, to keep her safe, to preserve something of who she was. He told Business Insider that he tries to be home every night. Once, after a trip to Puerto Rico, he turned around just to make sure he came back that evening. When he's away, the weight of, "What if I don't make it back?" isn't a metaphor, it's real. When he thinks about his estate, about the legacy of their life caught between comedy and car restoration, his conservatorship was always part of the plan. He told the court he wants to create a living trust for Mavis so that if he dies first, she'll be all right financially and in care. It is a sad thought to have, but despite the hardship, there are moments that remind him why he stays. He says Mavis still smiles when she recognizes him. She still tells him she loves him. When that happens, he melts. He said simply, "I can tell when she's happy, and when she looks at me and smiles, I melt." They still watch shows together, especially travel videos on YouTube. She loved exploring the world, and even though she can't travel much anymore, they bring the world to her. He jokes, but with tenderness, that these moments are his favorite. "We have a great time." At times, he leans on humor to survive. He told Hello magazine that caregiving means everyday tasks like helping her to the bathroom or feeding her, and you have to find the humor in it. He doesn't pretend it's easy, but he chooses joy anyway. Here's the crux. Jay's near-death experiences, the fire, the crash, they're not just reckless stunts. They're part of a bigger picture. He's not just racing vintage machines or pushing his limits. He's doing it because he knows how fragile life is. He knows what it means to lose grasp not just of safety, but of memory, of identity, of connection. Jay Leno's story isn't just about a man who flirted with death. It's about a man who refuses to leave the one he loves behind. His crashes and burns weren't just byproducts of obsession. They were consequences of a deeper, more dangerous love. And now the real question looms. What happens if he's not there? Who will rescue her from her darkest memory? Who will bring her laughter back when she forgets him?